Hello and welcome back to episode 1 of The Good Asian here on the Storied Arts podcast. I am your co-host Mike.
And I'm your co-host Alex.
And today we will be doing our book club style deep dive discussion into The Good Asian issues 1 through 4, otherwise known as Volume 1. And I think we covered a lot of this last week in this Zero, kind of the basic premise. Mm-hmm. And I think, I know that there are a lot of book clubs out there that will do mysteries. And, I'm trying to think of a popular mystery writer. I don't even know them. But I always wonder, like, what is there to discuss unless you're all just sitting around speculating on, like, who the killer might, who done it, basically.
That's a good question. I would think about maybe how, also, if you're discussing this like after the story is done and you know the ending, maybe you're discussing the mechanics of the story,
the breadcrumbs.
How good was the misdirection? Like
because that always pisses me off when you could not have guessed it.
A third of the way through, what's your mindset, and then halfway through, are you thinking the same thing, or did you get a different revelation? 3/4, that kind of thing. Maybe incrementally, you're talking about the craft work of the storytelling. I could see that being this, if you really wanted to kind of break it down and get nitty gritty with the story of how effective was the mystery told. I think about that oftentimes when discussing movies of the same realm, whether it's any kind of Sherlock Holmes or
sure.
I think you mentioned like Glass Onion, like or Knives Out, Benoit Blanc, that kind of thing of there is the story that you're watching from whatever perspective, and then you have the big parlor room reveal. And in that reveal, was it possible for you to have figured it out given the information that you were shown? It's about the mechanics of the story, and I don't know if that's something we want to get into here in terms of how things have been laid out, what's being
maybe at the very end,
maybe so, because I think this volume really, these 4 issues, it's just more and more crap gets laid on Edison, like every issue, it's almost like things just get worse as he's trying to work this missing person case. It just more and more crap gets heaped on him, like things get worse and worse. His situation gets worse and worse. And so it's just kind of, it's just piling on, up until the end of this volume, obviously, which, if you're listening to this, hopefully you've read, so it's not a big spoiler to say that, his childhood friend / surrogate brother, Frank.
I was going to say like adopted brother is how I would. I don't know if he was formally adopted.
No, he wasn't.
Functionally.
Functionally, because his mother was a housekeeper for the Caraways, and he grew up with Frankie and Victoria. Yeah, Frankie dies right there, and that's kind of boom, cut, end of volume 1. That's how it ends. A character we think is going to be, you presume, being a major player, a major character in the story, and he's taken out halfway-ish through. In the
right.
He's taken out in the 45-minute mark of the 90-minute story. The 100-minute movie kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, regarding the title of the book,
sure.
I have to admit I had a little like record scratch moment in my head when I saw the title. I saw it in a solicit or whatever, didn't know who the author was or something, and I thought it was going to be some patronizing thing written by a white guy. Yeah. And it would have been a really bad title, right? If it had been done that way.
Yes, this is, I can say this, you can't say this. It's one of those things.
Yeah. And I, for that reason, I was like, how do I find out what kind of book this is before I give it money? Yeah. And I'm really, obviously now very glad that I gave it money.
Yeah.
But as I was reading it, especially in the first issue, I assumed the title was referring to Edison, who is our protagonist.
Yeah.
And especially in issue 1, when we don't know all the machinations of his character and how he works, I'm like, is he really the good one? Because he's pretty rough with people. He, will try to like look out for a kid or something like that unless it compromises his career, and then he'll throw the kid under the bus, or he'll be the one to chase down other. And I will refer to them as Asian Americans, even though that's not how the story does.
Yeah.
Just because they're using an antiquated term that is period correct.
Here I think we can safely call them Chinese. I think
sure,
all the
but that's also not. I'm referring to them as being from the Orient.
Yeah, but specifically in this book, I do believe we are meant to understand that they are working specifically in Chinatown, and everyone there is Chinese or is Chinese origin. Chinese descent.
Yeah,
so
Chinese. I feel perfectly safe.
Yeah.
And the struggle of the series, in a sense, is like the transition from being Chinese to Chinese American.
Yes. Yeah.
And then eventually, the ABC, which, by the way, is a term I learned from the movie Shang-Chi.
I think a lot of people did. Yes.
Which is not explained in Shang-Chi. It's just, he said, "Oh, I speak ABC." And I thought that was a shorthand way of saying English.
I speak English. Yes. A lot of people did.
American-born Chinese.
Born Chinese. Yep. Yeah. But no, I think when you look at the title there, you're right. It's not meant to be that Edison is a quote unquote good guy or whatnot. It's a play on the idea of
how he is seen on the police force. There's a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, he's the good one,
right?
But then there's also the idea of the need to be the good minority, the model minority,
right,
which is something that they talk about here, and that's a very fraught thing that still exists today. The idea that it has been put upon Asian and Asian Americans by the white majority in terms of, oh, they're the good ones, be more like them, which is wildly patronizing and insulting, but it also
but it's real.
It's real, but it's also then used by members of that of the Asian and Asian descent as a way to get ahead in the idea of, I can do this and advance myself, but then you're seen as, well, at what expense? Like, what are you doing? What it's the conflict between what is your duty or responsibility, if you even have one, to the other members of your race or ethnicity in this country. That everything that you do is reflective of everybody else. Is that fair? Probably not. Does it happen? Of course it does. Is it something you should be concerned about? Well, I don't know. And it's case by case. So you look at someone like Edison here. Edison, we should say, he is a detective from Hawaii, because there's no one in the mainland there's no one in the mainland at this time in 1936 who would allow.
The opening pages are him being detained.
Yes,
as a detective. Right,
coming back to San Francisco where he grew up. So the fact that he and when, as he's going around town, we see in this first volume, when he flashes his badge, everyone's like, "Oh, either you stole that or you faked one," like no one. And these are the Chinese residents of San Francisco's Chinatown. He's the idea that, the Chinese detective make it feel more comfortable. You go talk to them. Well, he does that, and none of them believe him. They think if they talk to him, they'll get in more trouble because he stole that. It's fake. It's not real or whatnot. But the idea that, like in that first bust we see, right, when he's with that other wildly racist cop, which is probably just a regular cop back then.
Yep.
And the son of the guy he's arresting was like, "Wait, you're Chinese." Like, and he looks at him. He looks at Edison like, "What are you doing? Like, why aren't you helping us? Why are you, like perpetuating the same cycle that this guy?"
He's asked repeatedly throughout the series.
Exactly. And
now this is the line in that exchange at the end of that.
Yeah.
He says, "So guess what? You want to know when they stop treating us Chinese like dirt? When we stop giving them reasons to." Now, the first time I recalled that, I'm glad I returned to it on the page, because my recollection, that's page 13. The pages are numbered, by the way. My recollection was that was something he muttered to himself in his head, which made me think, oh, this is this is really bad. That's internalized racism.
Yeah.
That's him kind of buying the white people's narrative about their reasons for harassing and over policing Chinatown. Yeah. He's actually saying it out loud.
Yes, he is.
Which means that makes
a difference. Yes.
Of the good Asian.
Yes. Yeah. He is trying to, it's almost, he's saying like, if I'm the one that takes you down, I'm not gonna, might have concussion maybe, but I'm not going to break your arm. I'm not going to put you in the hospital, but I'm going to take you down because this is what I have to do to survive where I am. But it's better me doing it than someone else. And yeah, he's putting on the face by saying that because that line is total crap.
And we know who's standing in the stairwell with him as he says that.
Yes.
And that was not intended for the guy he's arresting. That was
it was for the other
officer.
100%. Yeah. But no, but
that is genius writing. I mean, we learned so much, and that's page 13 of issue 1. And I've learned so much about this character and the world. And that's like I was saying,
that first bust is so important. That first bust, that first arrest is so important for Edison because you learn everything about him. You're right. Everything about him.
And it's the Sorkinian, in his masterclass on writing, he talks about intention and obstacle. Everything's about intention and obstacle. And so we're like, okay, well, now we know what he's willing to do to overcome his obstacle. So what greater purpose is being served by him pandering to this racist cop? He must have some greater agenda that is more valuable
than
him and his character
dignity right now.
Everything. And so you learn that about him in a very clever way early on, because I could easily see, him with his hat, and trench coat standing in the rain, thinking to himself, like, I've got to be willing to do this. I've got to be willing to arrest other Chinese immigrants in order, like a lesser writer would have done that, and we would have done the same thing. Instead, we get an action scene. And the art here also. There's so much to say here. The way this is drawn, the way it is paneled. Shout outs to Alex Tefenkgi. The way it's written is obviously masterful, and then the coloring, the way it changes scene to scene, and this is compared to the grand scope of where the coloring goes in this series. This is child's play, but this is still really, really good coloring.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love how, especially as we go through, we'll probably come back to the coloring a little more, but the idea that it's almost like every scene has like an overtone, like an overlay on it, like everything is tinged in a certain way to set a mood or whatnot, that the colors are a little more muted. They're not quite as bright and shiny. So when it does flash, like when there's blood and it's a real bright red, or anytime you hit like a big splashy splash, a double page splash, something like that, those colors pop. And of course, how they do I don't know what to say. I don't know what to call it. Like the
texturing.
Well, I was going to say Edison's like detective eye. Like anytime they go to like which is, it's that like just the red rectangle of things he notices, and because
I love that
because everything else, again, a little more muted, may have a wash on it, like a yellow or a green or a blue wash on it, that the red really, really stands out. I like how all the flashbacks, they aren't like sepia tone, but it's like the comic equivalent of sepia tone, where everything's a little washed out and you can tell that this is a flashback sequence,
Yeah.
Whether it's his memory or someone else's memory. And I was just going to say, there's something washed out about that.
I couldn't remember how much of that was in volume 1. There's a lot of that in volume 2.
Yes.
But it's like they put a full color overlay on it and then just made that color transparent to a certain degree. But those colors, sometimes it's kind of a yellowish color. Sometimes it's a bluish color. Based on the like location and whose memory, other things all like different. That. And then sometimes the narration box from the present will be exempt from that wash over the page.
Yes.
Which means, this is just a full team effort because, Pornsak handed them the script and said, like, we needed to be clear. This narration's in the present. This thing's happening in the past.
Because you can
Tefenkgi
see
panels it in a way that allows for this kind of space for the letterer. The letter, the colorist comes in and does, okay, we're going to do the full wash here. And then the letterer says, okay, but I'm going to have a solid black box to distinguish this text from the other text on the page in the bottom right corner. There's one in particular that I'm picturing in my head as I describe this. It's in volume 2. So I'll be sure to shout that out in particular next week.
But no, I think you're right, because the speech bubbles that are part of the flashbacks that are in the past, those are all washed out too.
Yes.
You know? Yeah. So there is a clear distinction between what is being talked about in the present and what is being remembered in the past. And it all works as a piece whenever they do that. Because we get a lot of that here in volume 1. There is the various flashbacks to Edison's time growing up with the Caraways, but there's also like the recent flashbacks when he's doing his actual detective work and he's going around Chinatown and he's asking people the last time they saw the girl and things like that. And so even then, when we talk about flashbacks to, days and weeks ago, they still have that same sheen over them. They still have that same, just that same kind of washed out look that, that this is the story's being narrated. It's being told to him.
Yeah. I guess finally, since we're talking about all of the visual presentation, the final thing that's noticeable is, I mentioned it, there's sometimes a texture to certain colors, certain shadows, and then other times it's, just normal shading that you would see in any other comic. And this just kept sticking out to me. I think it just adds a depth to your field of view and your understanding, but his jacket always has a texture to it. Occasionally the shadowing around someone's eyes will have a little bit of like a rough texture to it, and sometimes the background will have a texture to it, and then sometimes it'll be a plain color. Sometimes is there anything other than like a check, visual contrast and it looks like it was colored on a certain thing, and there are a few different textures employed. I'm not reading any particular meaning into that. No, but I'm open to it, if I'm missing something.
You know what? Now that you're looking at it, now that you mention it, it wasn't something that I noted as I was reading, but I think it's just a matter of, I think that's one of those things, invisible things that just the way it draws your eye. So like I'm looking at I'm on page 50 right now. Edison has just walked into the Jade Castle and he sees Victoria.
This is the perfect illustration.
Sister. Yes. And
this is everything 50, we just talked about. We have one faded memory panel. Yeah. You have a plain green background in the top left.
Yeah.
And then you have the textured background for the conversations.
Yeah. The conversation of Edison in his suit, which is just clean, no color. And Victoria's in a black dress. And everyone around them is kind of faceless, nameless, no color. But they have that kind of checkered background, and it pops our characters out. So you get the sense that they are lost in the sea of other people, in so much as even when we get down to the final panel on that page, on page 50, when we see the other people we're supposed to pay attention to. Who is that? That's Terrence Chang, the lawyer, the people who own the Jade Castle. You see him at that table, and then people behind them, the same, nameless, faceless, featureless, just like silhouettes. And it emphasizes who our characters, where our focus is supposed to be, in a very simple way. Not saying that, if they had gone out of the way to put names and faces on these background people, because as we move through, specifically in this sequence, we start seeing more and more of that. But for that moment, right then and there, when our focus is supposed to be just on Edison and Victoria,
right.
The way he differentiates,
it's like a good camera shot, and
what's in focus, what's not.
And Tefenkgi has some, not a lot, but in this book he has some that have like a camera style blur to them, where the foreground and background will be blurred in not a normal comic way.
I think
cinematic is the word.
One of his tricks is what we're talking about with these checkers like that. If people, though, they're nameless faces. They might as well be blurs, but you understand you understand they're in a crowd of people. Those people aren't important. Our focus has to be, it's drawn to the front. You talk about cinematic going through this same issue here. This is issue 2.
Page 53.
Exactly. Anytime he goes to the 16 panel,
16
4 by
panel.
4.
Oh yeah, 4 by 4.
And
Yeah.
oftentimes they'll go to these 16 panel, very small rectangulars. And you can just picture that these are cuts in an action scene, especially here. This is as the club is being attacked. So there's panic, people running, and very close up shots of people, of action. And it's all about moving your eye down and across the page and creating that like manic feeling, like if you're in this club as these gunshots are apparently going off, people are going crazy. You feel the frenzy of the scene, and he does that by these quick cuts, these quick panels, and he does this. It's something he returns to this 16 panel page whenever they're doing this kind of quick cutting, or what you would imagine if you're watching a movie or a TV show. This would be when they're intentionally quick cutting back and forth between action, where it's meant to feel a little disorienting. Style. Yeah, that kind of thing. I think he does it.
That's probably a dated reference.
Maybe so. John Wick style, maybe kind of thing,
Yes, well, and you want to get real John Wick.
Yeah.
I think it had both the this is cool action and somewhat light levity of a Wick thing on pages 54 and 55.
Yeah.
When, this character comes out and he says a kicker. Of course he's a kicker.
Yeah.
And then and on page 55, the center one, he's doing like, elaborate backflips or something. And he just says, oh, you got to be kidding.
Yeah. But it's done in a very small panel. So you see each one of the elements of the back handspring. Yeah. Of course. And the guy is also, he's wearing this ridiculous giant, basically like mascot head, and all that. And then he picks up a hatchet and throws it,
Yeah, we can't say anything about his identity in this volume, right?
Yeah.
Other than we know, I mean, it was very clear
that
he's mimicking a former serial killer. He's not the original serial. And that's very clear in volume 1. I'm blanking. It starts with an H. I'm blanking on the name.
Hao Tong.
Is that's the serial killer?
That may be. I was
thinking the second name started with an L. Anyway.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember here.
We said we weren't going to get all bogged down in the details of the murder mystery, and we really meant it.
Yeah. Well, it's not that it's not important, but I think the more interesting thing to me with the murder mystery is something that we touched on last week when we kind of setting things up here, is just that like there are so many well-worn tropes here of film noir, starting with Edison, and obviously, the inner monologue, in here, obviously it's done in text, in narration boxes, but still the idea that you're following along with this guy and he's, hard-boiled, self-loathing, self-hating detective. It's directly in the mold of, Dashiell Hammett's Sam Spade or Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe. These classic detectives from the stories that we know from, like the Maltese Falcon or the Big Sleep or something like that. He's damn it. Edison is in that vein. He just happens to not be white. But he's still, by following along in his inner dialogue, you get his turmoil. Like, we talked about that scene early on during that first arrest, where he's not explicitly talking about like all the things he has to do, what he has to compromise, but he is talking about other things of like, he understands, you get insight into his mindset, that he understands that to some people, to some Chinese Americans, they see him as a race traitor, for lack of a better term, right? They see him as someone who has forsaken them for the sake of having a chance to be at the table with the white people, and some of them, he understands that some of them think that he may be delusional, that like you can have a detective badge, but you'll never be part of it. You'll never be one of them. You'll never be accepted, So
right. Well, and these are people who are like, that they just see you as the good Asian.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's like, I'm playing the role of that. Like, they think he's naive.
Yeah.
And he sees them as naive.
Yeah.
Like, don't you understand?
I'm trying to
play. If I can give them what they're looking for, then I'm the one in control.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's Edison's whole thing.
That's his whole mind. And you get that turmoil. You get him working through that through his narration, which again, in a classic, film noir, that would be the the narration that plays over a scene of the detective, drinking whiskey at 9 a.m. It's not, it's 9 a.m., but it's also pitch black out and it's raining outside of his office window, because that's how it,
and you'd hear the Zippo flip open.
Yeah. And then
it's a little flental. Shout out to the West Wing Weekly.
In the background outside the window, you'd hear sirens and all that, as he's like, that sort of trope is there. And it just happens to work so well in comics because you have narration boxes. Those are your inner monologue.
Right.
And they're used to perfection here where, you can see what Edison projects out into the world. You see how he interacts with the white cops, with the white people in San Francisco, with the Chinese people in San Francisco, and then also what he's thinking in his head. So, he has to play all these different roles for all these different people. And then you see how he's different with Frankie and Victoria, obviously this surrogate family, than he is with other white people he deals with. And you have this tortured soul that is just it's a hallmark of noir storytelling.
And I think the real hallmark is no one knows this character completely except the audience.
Yeah. But everyone thinks they do. Everyone
thinks they do because he shows enough of being a one-dimensional, single-minded person or whatever. But we have what the other characters don't, and I think that's a really clever way of endearing the audience to an imperfect character. Of we know more than everyone he'll interact with. Like they all think they know him. Only I know him. Yeah, and there is a certain loyalty as an audience member that you feel towards unlikable characters when you're like, I know Walter White better than his wife does. Type of thing.
And when we can justify, or when we can understand the character's justification for acting the way they are. So in this case here,
we don't even have to agree with it, but if we understand how he got there.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this case here with Edison, we understand, by the time, as you read through, you understand why he acts a certain way when he's around other detectives, other white detectives. You begin to understand why he acts and reacts a certain way to the Carraways, to Frankie and Victoria, because you see what his childhood was like. You see what their father was like and how he treated him and all that. You begin to understand why he treats and reacts the way he does to the various Chinese business owners in Chinatown, as he's trying to be the cop and all that stuff. You understand all these different sides to him because you're right. We've seen all the things. We've seen all the sides and all the facets of him. And whether you agree with him or not, it's all about making that, the complex character, the he's not a bad man, but he's done some bad things kind of things, but for the right reasons. It's that kind of character, which again, it's a tried and true trope of this type of this genre of storytelling.
Yeah. Let me just say another page that I love, probably my favorite single page in the book is page 63, which I think will not be numbered because it's a splash of sorts. But 62 is numbered and 64 is numbered. Now, this is talking about the 1906 earthquake that set fire to the Records building.
Yes.
And then we see this really beautiful depiction of the family tree.
Yeah.
Yes. So the real Americans versus the fake papers. Yes. They're called Paper Sons. And this is technically a history lesson.
Yes.
That could be really dry, but it's so good here. It's so good because we've earned it at this point in the story.
Yeah.
And Alex brings it to life with his art.
I think there are two things. One is it's a beautiful page, the idea of the family trees and the way that it works in that the fake papers have this blue tint to it, and then so those are the quote unquote fake Americans. And as we get down to the bottom of the real Americans, the ones that are born here, the color changes into that kind of pinkish reddish. And so you see a natural divide in your eye there. But so obviously the presentation is great. And even going before that, we get the various history lessons and the various narration boxes. But I think because it's put at the beginning of the issue, its placement is very smart there. You pick it up and you get a bit of this idea of the bit of history they're trying to get across into this issue. And then it goes, you get, 2 or 3 pages of that, and then it goes right into the story. And you start to understand why you were given this bit of history.
Right.
It isn't just history for history's sake. It is, we're gonna tell you this couple pages of what might be dry history to some people, but yeah, it's very much a lecture. It's very much a PowerPoint lecture of, here are things that happened that you reading this probably don't know. But then as we get
and you jump 2 pages and you zoom back in on the tree, and realize like, oh, that wasn't just pretty.
Yes,
here, let me show you these two characters separated by pink and blue.
Yes, why this matters, because this woman we're talking to now, this is where she falls on that diagram, on that tree. And so they're able to tie all of that in. So where it's that history exposition doesn't feel forced, And so we talked about at the top, it just, you don't feel like you're being lectured to, because it so very quickly and readily becomes part of the story. That this piece of history was important for you to understand this character that is going to be important in the story, and definitely important in this issue, to know where she comes from and know what her perspective is, because you then understand her perspective, not so much in opposition to anyone else's, but in contrast to, when you look at her and her father and how, and her and maybe the other older shop owners that her and Edison go and interview and talk to, by knowing that she is of a different generation, a very specific and delineated different generation than the older people that they're dealing with. You immediately get that her perspective is different. And so the information you're getting from her is unique in terms of this investigation, and you only get that by having that cursory understanding of these fake paper sons, and you get that through that wonderful drawing of the family tree, quote unquote. Heavy scare quotes are on the family part,
right? But it ties into what the emerging theme is, which is people will do whatever they have to do to survive, and to make it, and no one wanted to come over here and lie about their family to try to get other, Chinese immigration through. But that was the hand they were dealt, and they had to do what they had to do.
Exactly.
By the way, another favorite page that's in this same issue, page 79. First of all, I mean, I love it artistically. It's Edison at the top saying "free shot" with his arms out.
Oh yeah.
But I love the character revelation, because I was like, okay, well, I've watched a few things where you kind of have the young hotshot guy who might offer somebody a free shot. Mm-hmm. And what we learned is that he actually doesn't feel any obligation to fight fair, or to play by the rules. What I thought would be, I could see, like, I don't know, a young James Kirk, in a bar fight saying, oh yeah, free shot, and then I'll level you. Yeah. This is much more like Butch Cassidy.
He would actually take the free shot. He would actually get punched.
Right. Yes, he would absorb the free shot and then have a real fight. This is much more like Butch Cassidy, at the beginning of the movie, where he says, like, all right, before we have this fight, it's time to go over the rules. And the guy stands up straight. He's like, rules? There's no rules. And he just kicks him right in the junk. And he says, oh, well, if there's no rules, then let's have our fight. Yeah. And, that's what Edison is doing here. He's like making this guy have a lowered guard because he gets a free shot, and instead just wipes the floor with him.
Yeah. Well, and like on the next page in that double splash, she gets called out. She's like, wait, you said he'd get a free shot. And he's like, well, I'm not that dumb. Like, like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not that noble.
If I gave free shots to everybody who wanted a shot at me, there'd be nothing left to go around.
Yeah. But it is, again, I think it's a great character. And, you did call out that top panel on that page 79 there when Edison says free shot there. And, you see, in this case, there's a very Eastern comic aspect of, like, you see all these action lines there, which again draws the focus right behind him. And we see that in some of these other places, like on the next page on that double page splash, one of those panels, when you can tell Edison is angry, he's yelling. It's a close up of his face at an angle. And you have those lines behind him. And it's another way to show that in that panel, you can feel the emotion there. And I think it's another way that they that Tefenkgi uses the background to help tell the story, to sell the emotion there. By seeing those lines there, you get the action, the tension, and that's followed, of course, by the next panel, which is a close-up of his left eye, which is the eye that has a scar over it. So you through the page, through the paneling, through the way it's drawn, you understand how angry he is. That he isn't just, this is rageful. That he's and he's not mad at the girl he's talking with, but just because of the interaction that he's had, it's like everything
if
he's
you've
been
ever
dealing
been
with.
in a little confrontation like that, even without swinging, your blood's pumping.
Yeah.
Like you're riled up.
Yeah. And it's everything that he's been dealing with, everything's been bottling up. When she confronts him, it's like, did you really arrest that guy? Were you there when he was arrested? And he has no other outlet for it. And so he blows up, and you see that, you feel all of that just in those two panels there. And then you turn the page and he gets smacked right in the face. And again, you have the same action line background, which is kind of this red with the black. And then immediately afterwards, once Edison's kind of been humbled, there's just the one shot of him, his head's kind of down, the red mark on his face, and it's just like a brown checkered plane behind him.
Right.
Which is, again, you see for these couple pages here, all the heightened emotion that's been transmitted through this panel in terms of how it's been shown to the reader. And then you get immediately right then there that he's been taken down a notch, that he feels like he deserved that slap. It's almost like he was waiting for that to be the release. And now that emotion is all out of him. And he's just there. He's accepting it. And that panel, because it has this kind of brown background that we don't see anywhere else, in this sequence,
right?
You just get that that's a moment of quiet, of reflection. And I think of acceptance. That's him just being like, what do you want me to say? Like, I did what I did and I deserve that. There's a moment of him just collecting himself. And I love that contrast, because again, these are things that are unsaid, but as you're reading it, you pause on that because they want you to pause on that. It's just him with the slap mark on his face, kind of looking at the ground. They want you to take a breath there.
Use of a visual medium,
exactly.
Because lesser writers will write that into the script or the dialogue or narration thing, and it's like, if you trust your artist, you don't need that.
And if you trust your readers as well, because if you think about this as a movie, after that slap, you can cut to your actor and hold as long as you want. You, the audience member, can't dictate how long you're watching this scene. But as a reader of comics, you can decide how quickly you want to go. You can skip right over that. But I think because it's so evocative, you get to that page and you stop because of the way it's framed, the way it's drawn. It is trust in the artist to convey the emotion, but you're trusting the reader that they're going to get it. And I think you do. I think you stop on that panel because you want to see, like, damn, his face is really marked up. She smacked the hell out of him, and you sit, and they want you to sit with that emotion. And I think you feel it. And I think it's genius. It is a testament to what sequential art storytelling can do, because you're relying on the audience to pick up on the things that you're laying down for them. And they clearly want you to focus on this moment. They want you to take a break and take a breath with the character. And said, I think the way that it's portrayed, the way that panel stands out, I think it's perfect.
Yeah. One more perfect page, not that there are deficiencies with other pages, but on my list was page 96. And this is another one where the page isn't numbered and it kind of functions as a splash, even though it's just normal, but the puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
A great way to depict what is happening.
Little on the nose, but it works.
You know what? It is a little on the nose, but this is something that it would be too on the nose for a noir movie. And watching them kind of,
like if puzzle pieces like fell from the screen.
If they were like floating in front of, but as he's like, has this all out on the, he's thinking through everything, and there are smaller pieces out of focus, but the three pieces that are in focus are all slightly different colors, which in case you can't, in your head play with those, manipulate those pieces to see if they fit together. They don't.
Yeah.
Like there are clearly pieces missing in between. And anyone who's done a puzzle before knows you kind of group like colors together. And so there are two, one is green and one is kind of teal. Those probably aren't too far from each other on the puzzle, but the reddish brownish one.
The pinkish
is clearly a different corner of the map where the puzzle is. And I think that's a great collaboration between art and color in storytelling here, is to say, like, he's got a couple pieces that seem like they're pretty close to fitting together, and then some other dissonant pieces. So, even when you get those blue and green ones connected, that's not the whole puzzle.
Yeah.
Like, what does this other piece have to do with it?
Yeah. How do I get from blue, green to pink here? How do I bridge that?
And I'm not a big puzzle doer. I just lack the patience. I love them. Yeah, that doesn't shock me. The payoff for me is not worth it, but my wife loves puzzling. And you cannot buy a big enough puzzle for her. The other thing is I have cats, and puzzles aren't great with cats.
I can see that being a hindrance. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can do a 997 piece puzzle, and you have to be satisfied knowing that the 3 pieces are chewed up somewhere under the bed or furniture or whatever. But anyway, I think it could have been really bad. It seems like a risk to take to say, let's lay these out, a puzzle way. But I'm like, I would have been annoyed by the cliche of him putting them all on a board and using red yarn to connect them. Right. So that's the trope done poorly. This is a trope of, him recapping all the pieces and how they fit together that I haven't seen done before. Could be really bad, but totally worked for me.
It sticks out here too, because it is kind of a more surrealist moment there. Yeah, he's recapping the case, I guess, so far to Frankie, and the idea is, I guess, that as he's speaking this out loud, this is what he's thinking in his head, right? Right. That's how that he's seeing these pieces.
He can hold all the pieces.
Yeah, I know. I know what these big pieces are, but I've got no idea how they connect. No, I think the part you brought up about the various colors is so great. That it's not just to differentiate them for the reader, and that these are 3 different scenes, but the idea playing back into the puzzle aspect of it.
Right.
That
I assume that was the intention, because anyone who's done a 1,000-piece puzzle, the first thing you do, maybe find the corners and
find the edges.
But then you start lumping them by color and saying, I don't think this shade of blue is going to be in 2 or 3 corners unless it's a really difficult puzzle.
But
still, if it's like a monotone puzzle,
still though, you would group them together and try to find those pieces fit together, which ones fit together, even if you have 2 or 3 groups of pieces that don't all fit together, but they fit together by color, you can move them around in mass. So you're still trying to, it's about trying to find order in chaos. And I think that's what Edison's mind is doing. He has all these, the longer this case goes, he's getting more and more seemingly disparate pieces, and it's like all he's trying to do is find a missing girl. And yet every step of the way, it just gets deeper and deeper, and more things are coming in. He's getting dragged in all these different ways, and he's just trying to figure out, I don't even think he's certain if all these pieces connect, at this point. He doesn't even know if they do connect. It's possible in his mind, he's got 3 pieces from 3 different puzzles,
Oh yeah.
He's under the assumption.
And it could be an unrelated piece, but he's like, that picture, the trapped picture of the, affair, that plays into someone's using that for something.
Yes.
You don't accidentally have that picture.
Yeah. With the wad of cash and all that, who came through I got this through the investigation I was working on. So why would that be there? So you figure it has to be connected, but at this point, he doesn't even know. So no, I think it does work really well. And it is a cool motif there. A different play on the trope of, all the pieces matter. That's it's a Wire quote. Of course, on the Wire, they have they have the bulletin board and they have the string and the pins.
You had to have something visual on that show.
Yeah. But that's a well-known trope. for these types of detective stories that they didn't go with. They went with a different version of it. I said a lot more literal in that they are puzzle pieces, but I do think it works.
Yeah. So that, and then aside from that's him and Frankie riding in the car, and that's Frankie's last car ride, at least in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
And that's basically where we leave things this issue. Then you get the 2-page splash where the story is being told, I think, in raindrops. As you flip forward a little bit, I think it'd be page 104, 105, something like that. Very cool visual stuff continuing to happen. Big confrontation with the killer, and you get the killer without the mask, right?
Yeah, we see that he's not Chinese. One thing I'll say about the way with the raindrops there, whenever they go to a splash page, a 2-page splash, it's always something kind of interesting. The one we skip past it, but it's way back in issue 2, the moment when Edison first walks into the Jade Castle, and everything in the Jade Castle fittingly has kind of this green tint to it, that kind of green overlay. But right when he walks in, and that there's this big double-page splash of like all the like the singer and it's big bright colors, and it really stands out because it's like an assault kind of on your senses, which is I think how Edison feels, because I think the narration is a bunch of single boxes of just like, what is this, like it's this big nightclub action. And a splash page I think earlier was when the kid shows him the dead body with the maggots, and now here in issue 4, the way the storytelling can have some different and fun things by having the raindrops as they were. Each one of these segments is a different scene, a different moment. Whenever they utilize a splash page, the 2-page splash, I think it's for them to. I think it's a place for Tefenkgi to really, really flex and have fun with the layouts, with the paneling, with the order of things and all that, and really get to be more of a storyteller, I think. And it's deployed smartly, and
right.
concisely.
And we noticed this on Outpost Zero.
Yeah.
He does not sit down to start writing a page. He has the script, and Alex doesn't seem to sit down and, draw boxes and say, okay, here's nine panels, 3 panels, 12 panels. There's lots of, mismatched sizes and diagonal cuts and things like that, where you not in an intrusive way where you have trouble knowing the reading order like some people create, but his is just, I'm going to give each panel the space it needs and figure out the geometry and the math.
Well, I think he mentioned this when we talked to him. Is like I think he reads the page, and then he simply draws what he feels like it should be. Now, there are sometimes some artists where the part of the visual storytelling is we're keeping to the rigid 9-panel grid, 3-panel grid, whatever it is, and that is built into the storytelling. We're always going to do that. It's clear that here he has the freedom to simply tell the story as needed. Maybe there's an idea of like, hey, there's 4 or 6 panels here, whatever, but the order, the shape, and things like that, he seems to have that freedom, and it's just whatever the story needs. I think he may have mentioned this. The idea of he kind of pictures it cinematically in his head. He reads the page and
it comes out cinematically. I mean,
exactly.
And he sees himself first and foremost as a storyteller, not just the illustrator of someone else's story.
Yeah,
and he is carrying the story.
I think, visually. And I think there's a reason why when you see askew and off angle panels, maybe it's trapezoidal or anything like that, those all have intent. They're meant to. When he uses those, are usually in. You see him in a lot of action scenes, chase scenes, fight scenes, and I think they're meant to again evoke the idea that it's almost like going to a Dutch angle, on in a movie. Things you're meant to feel off. It doesn't feel. It's not symmetrical. It's not beat by beat by beat. It's chaotic, and you get that across because those are very different than when Edison is just going and interviewing people. They're very square, even, rectangular, but the action scenes are when things get wild and weird and get expressive, because I think he's trying to get that feeling of unease. that you would get from, watching a film, an action sequence, all the cutting back and forth, the action and things like that. He does that on the page just by changing up how the pictures actually look on the page, different paneling, different things like that. So,
yeah. So that was my last thing that I had earmarked, because everything else I have is getting into spoiler for volume 2.
Sure.
So I'll defer to you for any further notes or points of interest.
I think just the last thing I would say is, to anyone reading this, whether it's in the single issue you find or in the trades, read the historical notes in the back.
Yes.
They did an awesome job, I think, collecting what they used as reference, both as pictures, works they cited. There's a bibliography back there. I think it's just it's really important to understand that a lot of these places and landmarks are real, actual places. Like Angel Island, the place that Edison starts at the beginning, where he's being detained. That's a real place. It was essentially the Ellis Island of the West Coast. The difference was the people going through Ellis Island were, like Vito Corleone and people from Europe. They looked like that.
Right.
Everyone coming to Angel Island in San Francisco Bay Area were basically Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, wherever. It was people from East Asia, Southeast Asia, India as well. Those places, those experiences, being quarantined, being detained, all of that, it feeds into who these characters are and how they react. And I think I mentioned it last week, the idea of why the story takes place in 1936, and specifically then being explicitly like one generation after the China's Exclusion Act, the Immigration Act of 1924, all these wildly restrictive immigration laws that effectively targeted Asian Americans, Asians, East Asian, Middle Eastern, and even put quotas on people coming from like Eastern Europe and all that. They could still come, but there were quotas they had to hit. And the idea that the only Chinese that were here were either ones that were already here and then couldn't leave, because at some point, if you ever left to go back, like you couldn't come back. That was put into law as well, and only certain people were allowed in: teachers, diplomats, students, merchants, people like that. So no laborers, no workers. And so what does that do to a community when you're potentially separated from your family because they can't come see you, you can't go see them, and so you are bonded together in places like Chinatown, these places that exist out of necessity. I don't know if people, again, when you think about Chinatown, Little Tokyo, Koreatown, Little Havana, all these ethnic places in these major cities, they existed out of necessity because they were the only places where these people were allowed to own businesses, own houses, own property, pass things down. They were secluded here. And so because you couldn't leave the country and because the people from your home country couldn't visit you, you created family, you created community here. And so when one of the things they talk about, I think it was in issue 3, when they go through the history of like the Chinese businesses, like the 6 businesses that kind of were like this conglomerate that decided to run Chinatown. This is what happens. The idea of, well, we need to develop our own laws and governance of ourselves. And again, these are all historical, all things that are based in real history that I just don't know if people, it's not part of history that I'm sure you or even I learned in school. But it's an important setting to know who these characters are in terms of the girl that runs away, her friends that stay behind, who Edison is, what Frankie and Victoria's relationship are to Chinese and Chinese American. What is the character? Was it Terrence? Like the lawyer, the real well-presenting lawyer, the one who represents the Jade Castle. I think it's Terrence Chong or Terrence Chang, a character like him. And I think it's even Edison who refers to him of like, the idea of chasing perfect, that to be Chinese, to be a minority in this country, you have to be perfect. Otherwise you are a disgrace or you reflect poorly on everyone of your race and ethnicity. And Edison's his monologue was basically like, chasing perfect's normal a bit for people like us, but it's the ones who get there that you have to be wary about. The perfect smile, the perfect posture, the perfect part in your hair. Perfection takes sacrifice. So you have to be suspicious of anyone sad enough to go through with it.
Yeah.
But that is a very much a real idea that did pervade, and in a lot of ways still does through immigrant and minority communities. That it's the same thing that Edison said in that first issue. If we show them that we're good, and not just that we're good, but how good we are, how perfect we are, that we're not a problem, we're not a threat, we're welcoming to them and they're welcoming to us. If we show them that, that's enough for them to accept us and treat us as Americans, which in my 40 some odd years of life is complete BS. That doesn't exist at all. It'd be awesome if it did, but it doesn't. But there's still that kernel of truth and that thing in the back of your mind of, this is what we have to do. And it is a community ethos of, this is what we have to do in order to be accepted. This idea of being perfect.
Because it gives you the illusion of control, right?
Absolutely,
Is I can control whether they accept me or not, which is the greatest lie. Right? It's like people who are determined to hate you.
It goes all the way back. It goes all the way back to a place like Angel Island when you're being detained and you don't understand why. And it's just because they don't want you here. But you start telling yourself of, oh, well, if I do this, 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 and this, then I can get out of here. And if I do X, Y, and Z after that, oh, well, then I can, it seems like I can advance. I can have a life here and all that. And so all this, it's this piles of generational trauma that go back to things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Immigration Act of 1924, and places like Angel Island and all of that. So knowing that history and understanding what that did to generations of people, it feeds into understanding who Edison is and his relationship with his own identity and his relationship to his own community that, again, he feels a part of in more ways than one. One, he's a detective, but also the fact that he lives in Hawaii now, a place that's, I think at this time was probably a little more accepted. Obviously they were accepting enough to make a Chinese American a detective, which would never happen on the mainland. So he is searching for this sense of identity and who he is, and if that's even important to him, and all that's informed by the real life history that was brought upon by such stringent and racist immigration laws. It's in the late 19th century, early 20th.
Yeah. When this is just another way. So I think, and to me, this is the better book club discussion out of this series than the detective story itself. Like
I agree.
The mechanics of it are like, whatever, but there are many people I know who are only one or two generations removed from this type of policy, the trauma that it brings about, and it's totally invisible to someone like me unless someone like Pornsak tells an entertainment story about something like this.
Well, exactly. It has to be wrapped in this very cool, twisty detective story,
right? Which it's a shame that it does, but it's also great that someone's willing to take it on.
I agree, because I love a great detective story. I love seeing that. I love the whodunit, the case. Again, I love following that kind of noir storyline. And yes, I am heartened by the fact that you are also getting this other side, this other glimpse into history, this part of history in this country that just isn't known, and it isn't just like forgotten, but almost like ignored. This time when we were so outright and front street with discrimination and racism against immigrants, and specifically again in the Chinese Exclusion Act was the first time, and I think still the only time where one specific race and ethnicity from a certain country were targeted with with an immigration ban. Like
right.
People from this country cannot come here. Like that's even in today's climate, which is still not great, it is still wild to think that existed, you know? And I have to imagine there are a lot of people who picked up The Good Asian, and that was the first time they had ever heard of it. That was the first time they'd ever seen it portrayed or depicted in any sort of popular fiction.
Well, and especially I think the further east you go in the country,
yes,
which I've got family in the Bay Area, but most of them moved to the Bay Area and grew up in the Bay Area.
Yeah,
and I think I would hope you'd have a little more awareness of the history of the Bay Area.
I would hope so.
There,
I mean, Angel Island
LA,
is
they mention LA.
Yeah,
I guess that's in volume 2. They talk about LA.
Yeah, but still, I mean, LA and San Francisco were the points of there are ports of entry for people coming from East Asia.
Right.
My
Cincinnati,
family came in
less so.
Yeah. My family, my mom's family came in through LA, and that's where they settled. And my grandparents have been there for 50 some odd years now. I guess I'm sorry. Yeah, about 50 years in the LA area. So it's basically one of those two. And so, yeah, there are larger communities of Asian Americans and the first, second generation born stateside. Although I guess if we're going back to the 1920s and 30s, we're probably looking at third, fourth generation now, maybe in terms of, people who have, who maybe trace their lineage back to people that were in the States at that time. But yeah, it is, even there, it's still, I think, a slightly forgotten piece of American history, because it's not a flattering part of American history. Thus, we don't tell it a whole lot,
Well, there are so many stories like this that, when taken together, it create an almost overwhelming and depressing tapestry.
Yes.
Of American history in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Because we'd like to think problems like this were much longer ago.
And
really even as you were saying it, right? Yeah. Even as you were saying, because 1930, that's almost 100 years ago now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you were speaking of it as it's your grandparents' generation. Yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, it was. That's not really that long ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, by 1936, all my grandparents were born by then. They were alive.
Yeah, mine was 1922. My grandpa was born.
25 and 27, I think.
So he would have been coming of age when this happened.
Yeah. And so, I mean, my family immigrated in the early 60s and early 70s. My dad told me first, and my mom told me after that. So again, it's only like a half or so generation after this book's set. We're talking about 30 some odd years after the events of this book take place. So it's like a generation and a half or so after the passage of things like the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Immigration Act of 24. So we're not talking that far away. History isn't that far away as we might think it is. It's right. it and these are obviously issues we're still dealing with now. When we talk about immigration bans like we had, and or the focus just shifts. At first it was like, no Irish or Italians are coming in, right? So we don't want Europeans coming in. And then they got here, and then they're just Americans now. And now they don't want Asians and Indians and other people from across the Pacific come in. So the ban comes on the West Coast. And now, where do we want people don't want immigrants coming from? They don't want it coming from Latin America, Central America. So now we just turn our focus south, and the same thing is just happening. It's just the direction at which we're facing in this country to try and keep people out, because we have the same fears. What were the fears of immigrants from Europe and all them? What were they? They were laborers, right? Right. They were, menial labor workers that could work cheap, undercut the Americans that were here. They didn't like that from the Irish or the Italians or whatever it is. That's the reason they wanted to ban the Chinese, because Chinese laborers were coming over. Those workers, they were undercutting the Americans that were here, and that caused the depression then. And now we're focusing the same sort of thing, just on a different country, a different ethnicity, different group of people in a different direction. Because I don't think we're ever going to look north. We're not scared of Canada, I guess, but every other direction.
Not at the moment.
Yeah,
No.
we're running out of direction to try and exclude and discriminate against these people coming in, trying to find a better way at a better place in America. So as much as this feels like history, all the things they said about Chinese and Asians in the 1930s and 20s are the things people are still saying right now.
Of institutionalizing and creating broad cultural stereotypes against ethnic groups is an evergreen theme, and it's not. That's not just. It's not uniquely American.
No.
That's
we're living and reading and writing and creating these stories
for sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But there is a universality to this story, or a timelessness to the story in its specificity of, we're going to focus on this time with this people here. But when you read the things that they're talking about, when you just put a little bit of thought into it, you see how it applies over and over and over again throughout history to our current present day. And I think that's what makes stories like this so effective.
Yeah, I think, if you were going to tell this story right now, it would be like having, a Mexican border patrol officer.
Yeah.
Who's like, he would be the good Mexican. Would be
100%. Yeah. Or he'd be like an ICE agent who was his parents.
ICE agent is what I was going to say next. Yeah.
But his parents were they were illegal immigrants from Mexico City or Guatemala or something like that. But he was born here in the States. He was born like in, I don't know, San Antonio or something like that. So he's legal, but his parents and his family above generation, like we see in The Good Asian, they're the fake sons, the fake papers, but he's a real American. But now he's a border agent. He's an ICE agent, and he's at detention centers with migrant workers and things like that. And the idea of the separation of families and all of that would be the modern day story of this. And you could use the same sorts of logic, the same ideas, the same, looking at the same kinds of laws that we're trying to pass, and we've tried to pass. And
his relationship to inbound immigrants, you'd have a lot of the same dialogue. Like, absolutely. Why are you working with them? Like, where'd you get that badge from?
Yeah.
You don't have.
Why do you treat us like this? How do you work with them? And we would see the same thing of how he talks to his coworkers, right. Which are all non-Hispanic orient, a descent, a bunch of, that kind of story would absolutely work. And you would get the same ideas. You could tell that story, and it could be like, you could tell that version of the story, and instead of maybe a detective noir story, maybe it's like Sicario or something like that,
or Traffic, or
there's another genre you could play with there, while having that same historical or at least in this case it'd be the current day storytelling as well. Those two tracks that we talked about, the genre track and the historical track, or the teaching, the learning, educational track. In this modern day story, you just find a different genre to go down, and your educational track is just about current day affairs.
Yeah. Which, and I think a lot of people do try those type of things. Yeah. But I would say they miss more often than they hit.
They're hard.
That's the great thing about The Good Asian.
Well, I think it can be easier with distance, right? By making it a period piece.
Right.
There's a reason why they're so popular as allegory and metaphor for current day. I think it's easier to get it's much harder to thread that needle if you did that current day story at the southern border. It's much harder to thread that and get that right. Or it's at least it's easier to get it way wrong than by making it a period piece like we have here. But it helps with execution, but it's still got to be done well. There are plenty of period pieces that are bad. There's plenty of stories that try and tell stories like this, try to do what The Good Asian does, and are wildly less successful. So you still have to execute. You still gotta deliver the final product, and I think Pornsak and Alex here definitely do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see you next Thursday for issues 5 through 10, volume 2, and just ready to wrap this up. Ready to be ready from minute 1. We're gonna spoil everything.
Absolutely.
It took great restraint. This was one of the rare times where I was ahead of the reading schedule for the podcast.
Congrats to Mike.
I know, yeah. Now I know what Alex struggles through every single week.
Yeah,
especially when we do like a 12-weeker like the Unwritten, and he knows where everything's going the whole time.
That self-filter can be tough there, but yeah, no. Go find Good Asian Volume 2. Pick it up, read it. We can't wait to jump into it.
All right, we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Peace.